In today's gospel, Jesus tells us the cost of discipleship. And these costs are very high. Perhaps we should have waited to welcome new members until next week, when the gospel revolves around lost sheep and lost coins. That would be more welcoming for a Sunday where we welcome new members into our fold. It's also a curious gospel for God's work, our hands Sunday. But, of course, our lectionary is much older than our various approaches to God's work, our hands across the Lutheran Church. It's a much more negative-sounding gospel than we may be used to. Listen to what Jesus is telling us if we want to be good followers. We have to hate our loved ones. We have to pick up a cross, which in the first century would lead to literal crucifixion. And we have to give up our possessions. Yikes! Who would sign up for this? So let's ask the question that Christians have been asking for centuries. Does Jesus want us to take this passage literally? Different Christians have come to different conclusions. It's important to remember that for the first 3 centuries of Christianity, professing allegiance to Jesus would put you squarely against the larger culture, especially once it became clear that Christianity was a new religion and not just a newer expression of Judaism. Being a professing Christian in the Roman Empire meant that many avenues of wealth would be closed to you, and that family members indeed would be the ones doing the rejecting. Many Christians were killed by the Roman Empire. It is amazing that the religion survived at all, so fierce was the Roman response to it. But what does this passage mean for us today? Was Jesus giving future Christians this advice? And again, I ask, are we meant to take this literally? Some Christians would say yes, Jesus meant it literally. If we deny ourselves the pleasures of this life, loved ones, riches, life itself, we get eternal life. Some Christians would tell us this is a great bargain, 40 to 60 years of deprivation on this side of death, but an eternity to enjoy whatever pleasures paradise will bring. Scholars of ancient rhetoric would tell us that this passage is one of hyperbole, exaggeration used for some other teaching purpose, which was fairly common, a common technique, a common rhetorical technique in ancient texts. And even today, you hear this all the time. Often if you are watching news, people talking in extreme exaggeration to elicit some response from us. Maybe it's an advertising so that we pay for some new product. Maybe it's politics to make us fearful so that we vote for whoever is running. So maybe Jesus too was exaggerating the costs of discipleships. Maybe he's not really talking to the committed few who have already given up so much to follow him, and earlier martyrs like John the Baptist. Maybe he's talking to these crowds that he can't seem to shake. Remember, in the beginning of our text today, he's with these crowds again. Maybe he wants to be sure of who is really interested in discipleship and who's just following him hoping for a miracle. And you might say, wouldn't Jesus already know this? Yes, in the Gospel of John, Jesus would know. Jesus would know exactly whose hearts were where, but we're not in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of Mark, poor Jesus would never be sure of who was with him and who was against him. Even his own disciples, if you read the Gospel of Mark straight through, he is always unsure of his own disciples. In the Gospel of Luke, we see a different Jesus who seems to often give people outside of the disciples extra chances to declare their allegiance in a way that he doesn't always do in the other 3 Gospels. And maybe, to be fair, he is telling the people who think he's nothing but free meals and miracle healings that there's more involved. Is it a warning or is it a promise? Perhaps we've lost some of the nuance of the original words of Jesus. Maybe what he's saying isn't as horrible as it sounds at first. Maybe the concepts of Greek words don't translate as easily into English. For example, you might be thinking about that bit about the family, having to hate your family. Not leave your family, hate your family. But some biblical scholars say that Jesus wasn't telling us to hate our loved ones the way we would think that Jesus said, but to show non-preferential treatment. So people who are not related by blood to me, I treat them the same as the people who are related by blood to me. For a lot of us, I'm guessing we could live with this, but to the ancient world, this would just be appalling. Treat my sister the same way we would treat a stranger. Treat my mom and dad the same way I would treat someone just wandering through town. And Jesus says yes. But before we breathe a sigh of relief, let us make no mistake. Jesus is talking about the nature of sacrifice. And for some of us, the sacrifice will be steep. Jesus wasn't talking about the cross we'll have to pick up and bear in the sense that we might mean it, as in this difficult situation at work, it's just my cross to bear. We know from past readings that Jesus calls us to choose God over Caesar, God over our political rulers. And we know from history that this choice often came with the harsh penalty of capital punishment, whether that be crucifixion on a cross in Roman times, being assassinated by a bullet in more modern times. Even today in parts of the world, following God might mean that we make the ultimate sacrifice, our literal lives. As 20th century martyrs like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Archbishop Oscar Romero would remind us, it only takes a change in government for Christians to become targets. And that change to an oppressive government may not be as impossible as we want to think that it is. The idea that we have to give up our possessions, this idea that seems almost tacked on to the end of the reading, we might say, well, that's an easier cost of discipleship. We might say, okay, I'll give up my possessions if I don't have to give up my life. In matters of justice and mercy, I'll treat my loved ones just the way I treat everyone else. I can live with that bargain. And here we see the danger of taking this passage too literally. We lose the larger message that Jesus preaches. Here, as in so many other parts of the gospel, Jesus tells us that we should travel lightly in this world. In earlier translations, Jesus tells us to renounce our possessions. And that word renounce can have a slightly different connotation. It might be even more accurate to say that Jesus tells us to separate ourselves from our possessions. Jesus understands the ways that our possessions own us. Over and over again, Jesus warns us of the heavy baggage that comes with having possessions. And at this point, we might feel despair about our ability to walk on this pilgrim path at all. But our spiritual ancestors would tell us, if we would listen, that all of this gets easier with practice. If we think of all we own as being on loan to us, it's easier to pass our stuff along, easier to help others who don't have as much stuff. If we simplify our lives, it's easier not to clutch to our money as much. If we spend our time in prayer and spiritual reading, it's easier to rely on God. If we spend our time practicing inclusivity, treating strangers the same way we treat our friends, our family members, it's easier to expand on our ideas of who is family and who is friend. In this way, we bear the crosses of others, in that modern sense of the world. We lighten the yokes for us all. Discipleship is a process. We are not born good or bad disciples. It's a process that benefits from practice. Like the person who builds a house or the ruler who contemplates war, we have calculations to make. Jesus is indeed warning the uninitiated, to be sure. But Jesus also asks us to calculate the cost of discipleship. Jesus understands that all the ways that the lives that we are living can be a form of death. The cost of discipleship also comes with a promise of opportunities that we wouldn't recognize otherwise. The cost of discipleship comes with enormous gain, a life worth living, this life here, not the one after we die. The discipline of discipleship transforms us into believers who are, in the words of our psalm for today, like trees planted by streams of water, bearing fruit in due season, with leaves that do not wither. Everything they do shall prosper. If that's the cost of discipleship, that we become like those trees, then it's really a bargain. A bargain when we do those calculations. It's a bargain and a very valuable gift. Amen.